my husband and I traveled to a small island nation to go and do some volunteer work. When we were there, my husband, who is a family doctor, we were asked if we would go to another neighboring village, which was a 3-hour boat ride away. And this village had never seen a family doctor before. And so, of course, we said yes. And we got into this rickety little boat, and we started this journey out toward this village. And as we started to approach the shoreline, one of the most magical things started to happen. We could start to see that it was lined with little bodies. And the closer that we came, the more we could see that it was lined with children. And even closer, as we arrived at the shoreline, we could see they were children. And many of them were wearing tattered t-shirts, many of them holding on to adult-sized underwear, every one of them with a distended belly and red tinges on the corners of their hair, a sign of what is called kwashiorkor in medical terms, or malnutrition to you and I. But those kids were playing just like kids do. They had no idea that anything was wrong. And we tossed off some soccer balls, and we got off and we played with them for a little while. And then we went over to a building that the village had established. It was a small room, and inside of that room, my husband was set up. We had an interpreter, and I was taking notes. And the people of this village, they lined up around the building, there to see the medicine man. And one by one, over the course of the day, they came in. And they presented with the same kinds of things that he would see here in North America. High blood pressure, diabetes, etc. But there were 2 young men that came in during the course of that day, and they were both in their late 20s, early 30s, and they presented with the exact same symptoms. They both talked about how they had a fever in their belly. And so Nick asked them probing questions. Well, when do you have the fever? When don't you have the fever? And the reality was, the only time they didn't have the fever was the once, or perhaps twice, in a week that they'd had a meal. They didn't need a diagnosis, they needed food. And I don't tell you that story to make you sad. I tell you that story because I believe that when we share our stories, when we tell our stories, like-minded people want to join with us and help to do good in the world. And I am very pleased to tell you that in this village right now, there is a school, their very first, that has been built, and it has a food program that feeds the children and it feeds their families. That will be a step for them out of the cycle of poverty. That story is about service, and service is one of my personal core values. So, let me ask you a question. How many of you in the room know who you are? How many of you know your own personal core values? I'm not talking about right from wrong, good from bad. If I were to ask you to name 3 to 5 words that define who you are, could you answer that question? Our core values are our sacred truths, the things that define us, the things that no matter what happens, no matter what situation that you are in, they don't change. A couple of years ago, I was at a conference, and there was a speaker, a great guy out of the Chicago area, John Bloomberg, and he put forward a similar kind of challenge to the audience to think about what's important to us. And at the time, I thought, well, of course I know who I am. But as I sat back and tried to think about the words that defined my life, I hadn't done the homework. I thought I knew who I was. But I had to go home, and I had to sit, and I had to think about what was important. What are those sacred truths for me? So today, I want to share with you the remainder of the 4 additional core values that I identified for myself, in the hopes that this might spur some of you to go away and do a similar exercise. because I truly believe that if we identify what is important to us, what is at our core, that it helps us to lead a life of purpose, a much more fulfilling life. So, let me continue. I have a brother who lives in Chicago. He's a wonderful artist, and my husband and I were visiting him, and while we were there, I wanted to, there was only one thing I wanted to do. We were going to go out shopping for a day, and I wanted to find a gratitude journal. Now, many of you will remember that this was an Oprah-led craze about 10 years ago, the whole notion being that you would write 3 or 4 things down a day, and it would help to create the power of positive thinking. This was something at that point in time in my life that I thought would be really valuable. And so we found ourselves in this lovely little boutique in the Chicago area, and as I was shopping around, on the floor in a basket, I saw this beautiful tapestry-covered book. And so I bent down and I picked up the book, and I opened it up, and the pages were empty. And so very quietly I said to my husband, I said, "This is going to be my gratitude journal." And so I put it on the counter, and I shopped around a little bit more, and finally went over to the counter to pay. And the clerk took my book, and he walked down to this end of the counter, and he pulled out this beautiful wrapping tissue paper, and he wrapped up the book, and then he walked down to this end of the counter, and he pulled out this beautiful blue box with gold piping. And then he walked back to the center, and he pulled out this gorgeous ribbon, and he took all this time to make it quite elaborate. And then he handed it to me. And he said, "I couldn't help but overhear what you said, that this is going to be your gratitude journal. I want to be the first entry in your book. I want you to write that the man who sold you this book took the time to make it a more beautiful experience, a more meaningful experience. He is indeed the first entry in my book." And it's silly, but the second entry was a really good pickle that I had later in the day, because sometimes a good pickle just makes me very, very happy. But that is my second core value, gratitude. Being grateful for the things that happen in everyday, ordinary, not necessarily over-the-top moments, but those one-on-one connections between people and the things that make us grateful. The next of my core values is love. I've had a wonderful opportunity to be involved in an organization called Rotary International, a global organization of leaders who join together to exchange ideas to solve the world's most pressing challenges, both here in our local communities on a global level as well. One of the programs in Rotary is a youth exchange program, and I've been very lucky to have 3 youth exchange sons, one from Brazil, one from Denmark, and one from Ecuador. And they have enriched and added so much to mine and my husband's lives. We don't have our own children. And so our first exchange student was a young man named Leo from Brazil. And he arrived in August, the year that he was with us. And his language skills, to be quite honest, were really good. But you know what? In high school, he was struggling. He didn't feel the confidence in his own language ability at that point. He was still integrating. And you know, he came from a place where he was the cool kid. He was the one at home that had the girlfriends, that organized the parties. He was the it guy. And so he was in very different territory when he arrived in Canada. And so a few months went by, and we spent lots of time with him and gave him lots of love. And we were coming home from midnight mass, and it was one of those absolutely spectacular nights when it was just one of those beautiful nights where the snow is drifting down just gently, and it feels like you're inside of one of those shaky snow toys. That's the kind of night it felt like. It was magic. And from the back seat, Leo said, "Nick, Jen, I want to tell you something." So I said, "Well, what's that, Leo?" And he said, "I love you." And then Nick said, "What do you want, Leo?" And he said, "No, you don't understand. You don't understand. I have never spoken these words before to anyone, not even my own parents. This is what you have taught me." What a gift. What an incredible gift. And that is why love is one of my core values. The fourth is integrity. I believe that we need to do the things that we do because they're the right things to do. The things that we do, that it doesn't matter whether anyone else is looking at us, that our internal compass always drives us towards the things that we know are inherently right as opposed to wrong. I'd like to tell you a story about a fella named Larry. He belonged to a company, and the CEO of this company was going to retire in 1 year's time. And he didn't have any children, and so he called into his office all of his top executive team. And he said, "In 1 year's time, I am going to retire, and one of you in this room is going to become the new CEO of our company." And he said, "And I'm going to give each one of you a seed. And I want you to go home, and I want you to plant the seed. And the person who comes back with the largest plant is going to be the new CEO of our company." And so everyone went away, and Larry went away with his seed, and he went home, and he planted it, and he watered it, and he nurtured it. He did everything. He even talked to it, and nothing happened. And so week after week, he would nurture, he would water, he would do everything to try and make this plant grow. His wife was even helping him. Now fast forward 1 year, and they go into the boardroom, and Larry's got nothing. And all of his colleagues have these great big plants. And they're all making fun of Larry. They're all teasing him. "Why don't you have a plant, Larry?" And the CEO says, "Larry, I'd like you to come up to the front of the room." So Larry came up to the front of the room, and he put his arm around him. And he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to introduce you to the new CEO of our company. I gave you all dead seeds." Larry was the only one who had the integrity to not cheat. He was the guy, and I think all of us should be a Larry. And that's why integrity is the fourth of my own personal core values. The fifth is leadership. Leadership is a wonderful journey. As I told you, I'm very involved in Rotary, and that is an area where we bring leaders into an organization and we make them better leaders. And I was at a training session in San Diego a couple of years ago, and it was a 2-week-long conference. And midway through this conference, I received a call from my brother that it was 7 o'clock in the morning in San Diego. I live in Windsor. And he was letting me know that my father had just collapsed in church. Now, we were pretty quickly able to surmise that he had suffered a stroke. And so I knew that I needed to be on the next plane out of San Diego, and I needed to be with my father, without question. And so I flew home and very quickly got into the emergency room. And at that point, my mom and my husband and my brothers left and went down to the cafeteria to go and take a little bit of a break. And I crawled into bed with my dad. He had complete right side paralysis. And I laid there just rubbing his arm, comforting him, comforting myself. Now, before I tell you the rest about my father, let me tell you a little bit about my mom that year. My mom has always done the bookkeeping for my dad's tool and die shop. She has been a leader in her church. She's been a volunteer in many different capacities, but she never really had the opportunity to really stretch her leadership skills. She'd not been ever given that gift, that opportunity. And that year, she became a Rotary Club president. Over the course of that year, my mother changed. And being able to watch that was one of the best gifts of my life. She really rocked it. It was awesome. So back into the hospital, my father, through very garbled speech, says, I always thought that I would take care of your mother. But because of Rotary and her leadership skills, I now know she can take care of me. The fact that he had seen the woman that he loves more than anything in the entire world grow that much over the course of 1 year at a later stage in her life. Wow. What a gift. What a gift. And that is why I think leadership is one of my own personal core values. So I'd like to go back to the beginning, to the question that I asked you. Do you know who you are? I'm sure there's many of you in the room who have probably done the exercise, and I'm sure that there's many of you in the room who haven't done the exercise. So I challenge you to go back into your own homes, to sit and do the homework, to think about what is important, what is at your very core. What are your core values? Because, ladies and gentlemen, in the end, there is no one who knows you better than you. Thank you.